Got a very interesting interview for you guys with Ted Rall. He's a well-known cartoonist. His work appeared in Time, Fortune, Bloomberg Personal, in over 100 daily and alternative weekly newspapers in the 1990s. Then he had some trouble during the Bush years because he is definitely not of like mind with George W. Bush, but surprisingly also has trouble in the Obama years, which we're going to talk about in a second. He's also, by the way, the author of the Anti-American Manifesto, and his website is tedrall.com. Ted, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great to have you here. First of all, just real briefly, tell us about the trouble you had during the Bush years.
Obviously, like a lot of progressive voices, we found ourselves marginalized, especially after 9/11. It seemed like the general space for political discussion in the U.S. shifted to the right across the board, so that pretty much you had Bill Maher on what passed for the left, ranging all the way to crazy neocons like Wolfowitz on the right. And that was pretty much all that was acceptable. And so a lot of newspapers and magazines started trimming lefty voices from their pages, and that also coincided with a meltdown in the print media. So it was a pretty tough patch there throughout the Bush years. And I was definitely hoping for an improvement when Obama came in 2008, because I just thought, I've been doing this cartooning and writing since the early Clinton years, and I thought, well, it'll probably look a lot like that.
And apparently it didn't. Tell me why.
Well, that's hard to say. Part of the problem with what I do is when you get a rejection, you're never 100% sure why it is. I mean, sometimes they just don't really have space, and they'll say they don't have space, and that's true. Sometimes they'll say they don't have the money, and certainly in this day and age, that's true too. But I had a surprising number of editors who are working for progressive or so-called liberal publications who were very overt over the past couple of years in not tolerating any kind of criticism of Obama, particularly criticism from the left, which is what I've been doing. I mean, like a lot of lefties, I've been pretty disappointed with the president, and I feel that he's been carrying on a lot of the Bush policies, particularly related to the economy and the war, and so I've been going after him from that point of view, which is, really the job of a political cartoonist. But there doesn't seem to be any space for that anymore. It just wasn't like that under Clinton.
Can you name names? What are some publications that told you that, hey, listen, you're coming at him too hard from the left?
I can't name names, and here's why I can't. I quoted some emails that I'd received in my column last week, The Rise of the Obamabots. And I just don't want editors to think that if they correspond with me, that my correspondence with them from a business perspective isn't confidential. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, look, people are telling me this, but it's another thing to post someone's email and who it was who did it. It's just I'm willing to set the bridge on fire. I'm not really willing to nuke it at this point.
Okay, I hear you. And look, I understand that, especially in the beginning, that was a problem. I know it's still a problem for a lot of people. I did a panel on MSNBC today with David Sirota, Jane Hampshire, and Adam Green, and the Obamabots lost it. They're like, why don't you just have a Republican panel while you're at it? Apparently, it's hard to understand that, hey, you know what? These people are to the left of the president. To the left of the president. I don't know why that's so hard to comprehend. But has it gotten any better for you, Ted? As time has gone by, have people been like, hey, you know what? Maybe you were kind of right about that?
No, it really hasn't. I kept expecting a lot of people to take a little bit longer to realize that Obama was really kind of a center-right president. He's not a liberal by any means. And I think a lot of Cornel West's comments are well taken, especially on the ideological front. But I'm kind of used to Americans taking a while to realize that their presidents have feet of clay. Bush was compared to Churchill after 9/11, and it took a good solid 3-4 years for people to realize what he was really made of. And I thought, and the same thing kind of happened with Obama. I kind of turned on him as soon as he announced his economic team. I knew that this president was going to be a disaster confronting the biggest problem that we face today, which is the economy. But at the same time, I thought, well, this will take time. But it's been time. It's been over 2 years, and it's just shocking to me. I mean, if you're on the left, how can you possibly be okay with the Libya policy? How can you be okay with the expansion of the war in Afghanistan? How can you be okay with the coddling of the bankers and all? It just goes on and on. The domestic wiretapping program, Guantanamo is still open. A guy committed suicide there a couple days ago. And progressives seemed like they've forgotten about their principles, and instead they're just defending their man, and that's not what I'm all about.
Ted, you mentioned a bunch of things there, and I wanted to ask you a couple questions about that, because I think we agree on 85 to 90% of the stuff. We actually disagree on Libya. I'm going to get back to that in 1 second. But, you mentioned coddling the banks, and I think a lot of Democrats out there don't quite understand that. Like, when you say that, they say, what do you mean? He passed historic financial reform. So how would you answer that?
Well, where are the prosecutions? We're talking about there was rampant insider trading. These people on Wall Street were thieves. They stole money from investors. They misused the bailout money to literally remodel their corporate bathrooms. They gave themselves raises with federal tax dollars. A lot of these, the heads of these major banks should be in prison today. And this administration just doesn't seem to really like investigations. Just in the same way that Obama announced that there weren't going to be any investigations of torture under Bush. The policy seems to be just to move on, but the net effect is that there's no consequences for wrongdoing.
Ted, I think a lot of the people you call Obamabots would say, but what could he do? Look at the circumstances that he found himself in. And, you have this economy imploding. What's he supposed to do? Not give money to the banks and then have it us be in the Great Depression, et cetera, et cetera. And, he was dealt a really bad hand, and your expectations of him are far too high. How would you answer that?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, he's the one who wanted the job. And so, you can't really blame those of us who have high expectations from a guy who ran as being the competent, smart, calm alternative to the Republicans and Bush, and the continuation of those policies as we would have seen under McCain and Palin. So, no doubt he inherited an economy in full-fledged meltdown. But at the same time, as someone, I forget his name, said, never squander a crisis. And he did squander a crisis. If the banks were too big to fail, why not nationalize a couple of them? Then they belong to the federal government, and when they turn around, the profits belong to the taxpayers.
All right, so let's get to a fun little disagreement we have. I actually am in favor of his Libya policy, and I'll tell you why. I think that, if you let Gaddafi run roughshod through Misrata, et cetera, that it would have sent a message to the rest of the dictators, hey, Egypt and Tunisia screwed up. What they should have really done is murdered all the protesters, and we would let them get away with it. Now, I know you can say, hey, you know what? We're not doing it in Bahrain. We're not doing it in Yemen. We're not doing it certainly in Saudi Arabia, and all of that is very convenient. You're right. But I think, hey, at least we're doing it in Libya. So what do you think about that, Ted?
Well, two things. I worry about the what-if thing. It reminds me too much of Bush's call for war against Iraq. What if Saddam attacks the U.S. with nukes? What if? Well, anything's possible. We don't know really what the Libyan loyalist forces would have done in Misrata. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that is how things would have ultimately gone down. Well, we have sided effectively with one side in a civil conflict without really knowing a hell of a lot about them. You know, we've put American lives at risk. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe perhaps billions of dollars at this point, and we don't know what we're going to end up with. I mean, what if Gaddafi is right and we end up with radical Islamists? I mean, they are part of the coalition that's fighting Gaddafi. That worries me terribly. I mean, this could be Afghanistan 1992 all over again. And then at the other part that really worries me is the fact that we seem to have created a stalemate by not going all in. We seem to have balanced the two forces, and at this point, what was supposed to take a couple of weeks seems like it's becoming this drawn out, endless conflict. I mean, now it seems like the U.S. has had the effect of evenly balancing the two sides, and the blood is just running.
All right, let me just quickly state my case on that, and then I want to get to our overall point. Look, it wasn't quite a what if. He had already killed a great number of people, and it seemed fairly evident, I thought, that he was about to kill a lot more. That's what the people in Libya were saying. That's what people throughout the world were saying. But he'd already done a lot of it, so it wasn't like a total what if. Second of all, look, yes, there might be Islamists in the mix. There's no question about that. On the other hand, what do I prefer, a dictator? No, I would rather take a chance on democracy, you know. And is it going to be great, perfect democracy? Nowhere near it. And I am probably the only guy in the country who believes that Obama's half measure in that regard is the right way to go, because ground troops is counterproductive, in my opinion, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I thought, hey, you know, give the rebels a fighting chance and see if they can pull the thing off. And I'm actually, believe it or not, somewhat encouraged that we're going in the right direction. Now, look, I just state that as that's my case, that's your case. You know, I hear you on what you're saying. I think you have a perfectly reasonable position. You're to the left on me on that. But I don't, because you're to the left on me on that, I don't think you're anti-Cenk Uygur. That's what.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, well, the argument that I was making in my column last week was merely that these are the kinds of debates and discussions that ought to be occurring in publications like The Nation, Mother Jones, The Progressive. And although there are, certainly anti-Obama opinions expressed in those publications, they're very, very mild, and there's really nothing that comes from as far left as I am. And, frankly, I'm not that far left. I mean, there's big percentages of the country that agree with me.
I hear you on that. Well, the Washington spectrum has shifted unbelievably to the right, but I don't think the country has shifted that much at all. If at all. You look at the polls, and the polls are totally progressive, but just nobody ever listens to the polls. So just final thing, Ted, you talk about the Obama bots, whether it's in the media or it's in the Democratic Party overall, what's your sense of what percentage they are? I mean, I know, of course, we're just totally guessing, right? But given your experience, is it that they're the great majority? Are they don't seem to be the minority, or are they barely a majority?
I would say in this day, and right now we're probably looking at between 35 and 40% of the voting public are people who would vote for Obama no matter what. And that's probably about the same number who would have voted for George W. Bush no matter what. And the swing is in the middle. The problem is that the media is not really reflecting that mix. A lot of people are very disappointed with the president, and they're not all crazy Tea Party people. So, the discussion deserves to be a little broader.
All right, finally, Ted, I think what everybody wants to know is, what's your alternative?
Well, I would have liked to have the president, not that Obama ran as, because he really did run as a Democratic Leadership Council kind of Clintonite type person, but the president that people thought they were voting for based on the tone and the hope and change posters and all that. I just think that the country is no longer. You should no longer be enthralled to failed right-wing policies like trickle-down economics, the healthcare system that's completely broken and not going to be fixed by this sort of quarter measure that Obama is putting through. We need to try something new. The economy is in complete collapse. We are in late period capitalism. Unemployment is skyrocketing, and these are if people are talking about a recovery. That's a joke. I mean, with 1 out of 5 Americans out of work, These are the same numbers as we saw in the early 1930s. We really need some radical solutions.
So, primary Obama, or how would you go about it?
Well, I would love to see a left-wing challenge to Obama in the primaries. Certainly, there are, I think people like Ralph Nader are played out. But, Feingold, someone like that, it would be really nice to see that. I mean, I don't really see how that's going to happen because Obama is coming to the table with $1 billion, supposedly, in campaign financing, but or at least so he's threatening. But I just don't know how much of a democracy you can really say we have if the presidential nomination is already a foregone conclusion a full year ahead of time, and that that he's already so favored that major Republicans are dropping out of the race because they're afraid of him. Although I think they're probably overstating the case. So, I think the system's a mess.
Well, on that, we definitely agree. All right, Ted Rall. Everybody can check him out at tedrall.com. And, of course, his book is The Anti-American Manifesto, and the article is The Rise of the Obamabots. All right, Ted, thanks so much for joining us on The Young Turks.
Thank you.